Hey folks, welcome back. I'm going to be doing this alone today. So the idea is we don't want to just be a commentary channel. We want to actually educate as well. There's a lot people these days don't understand. And from the title of this video, you see Fascism and Communism, the same ideologies, different facades. I want to explain that thing to you. Again, these aren't this video will not be commentary. This video is more educational. Um, Please just be patient. There's a lot to unwrap here with these two ideologies, but here we go. So let's start with fascism. What is fascism? Well, fascism was founded in 1914 by Benito Mussolini in Italy. Originally, Mussolini was a member of the Italian Socialist Party, but he ended up leaving because he brought something else to it, which was this idea of nationalism and this. But what is fascism boiled down? Fascism is the idea that the group is more important than the individual. Now, let's go into communism. What is communism? Communism was founded in 1848, of course, by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This was the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. It was a political theory actually founded in response to the growing hardships that many urban and rural workers and serfs, specifically in Russia, were suffering under the ruling class. Remember, in 1848, the world was ruled by emperors and kings and things like that, but also the industrial leaders of the world were rising. You had the Carnegies, you had the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans. They had them in Europe too. It's just so it was created off this idea of class war and moving society in a way in which the collective owns all property and means of production. So these ideologies kind of sound similar a little bit, don't they? Because in all honesty, they are. Something I say a lot is fascism is just communism being honest. So we're gonna go through the history. I'm gonna explain everything to you, the rise, the falls, where it's worked, where it hasn't worked. Newsflash: it really doesn't work anywhere. It always comes down. But let's start. So real world examples of fascism. You have Benito Mussolini in 1919 marched on Rome with his followers, who were nicknamed the Black Shirts, and seized the Italian government. He had the King of Italy name him Prime Minister, and then that year he was declared El Duce, which is not the bad word you think it is. That was the title he gave himself. It's like the leader. He ruled Italy for a long time, pushing nationalism, the state control, promising Italy would become the second Roman Empire, the greatest in the world. Later on, 1940, war breaks out. Italy loses. Mussolini is captured by Italian partisans and executed in 1945. Now let's move to Adolf Hitler. In 1934, following the death of German President Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler combined the office of Reich Chancellor and Reich President into one position, Führer of the German Reich, which he declared himself. In his tenure as dictator, he pushed neo-nationalism, he pushed his anti-Semitic, anti-race policies forward, resulting in over 12 million innocent Jews, Gentiles, Catholics, politicals, prisoners, socialists, communists, Catholics, I think I said Catholics, gypsies, a whole group of people, 12 million altogether, murdered violently. In April of 1945, surrounded by the Russians, he committed suicide in Berlin. And our last example will be Francisco Franco. Now, he's going to be a little different. So, Franco would assume power of Spain in 1936 as the Caudillo of Spain. Again, the very simple terms, Führer, Duce, Caudillo. It just means head, leader. Now, unlike Mussolini and Hitler, Franco one, did not go to war with everyone. Two, he did not target people based on race. He didn't target them on this. It was actually, he was in charge of the army of North Africa for Spain. That's who he led in the Spanish Civil War that won him the country. He was a monarchist. He was a, I guess, religious zealot, you could say. He reinstated the monarchy of Spain. He, as the years went on, began to give power back to the assembly and everything. And then in 1975, he passed away from natural causes. And then after that, Spain returned to a democratic country. Actually, a lot of Franco's policies are still used in Spain today, which is amazing because, you know, you think dictator, you just try to get rid of everything. All right, so that's fascism. Those are three big fascists. Let's talk about communism now. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, in 1917, appointed himself head of the Communist People's Council of Russia, ordered the execution of the imperial family to the, I believe it was the Yekaterinburg Soviet, and declared the Soviet Union. He actually, of all the people we're discussing today, he would have the shortest term as the head of their state. He would rule until 1924. He would die, unfortunately, from a long battle with a undisclosed blood disease, which resulted in 3 strokes and a coma. During his term, the issue with Lenin is he wasn't around long enough for us to actually know what could have happened. There's always this optimist in everyone that says, oh, well, you know, he would have been a communist, he would have been a Marxist, he would have, the people rise up. He did die in his own dacha outside of Moscow, which is pretty much just like an estate. So I don't know how much he really did care. People often called him Robespierre because he was consistently just trying to help himself. But again, we don't know what would have happened. But that was the first communist takeover. Mao Zedong in 1943 during the during the Japanese occupation in China, seized command of the Communist Party of China. Then later, the entire nation, after his Great March, is when he marched through the countryside and recruited his large army, and then beat Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists. He would then take over China as first chairman. His policies would unfortunately kill over 78 million Chinese citizens. And then in 1976, after a long fight with lung and heart issues, he passed away. Now, our last communist we're going to discuss is Fidel Alejandro Castro. In 1959, he overthrew the Western-backed Batista in Cuba. He would then attempt to put programs in effect like the Soviet Union, because again, the Soviet Union had not fallen yet. Everyone thought they were a powerhouse. Of course, that was propaganda, now that we are ahead of that. Unfortunately, the policies he tried to enact were for a frost-ridden nation, not an island nation. So it caused massive starvations. He did try to help education, but that kind of fell apart as well. You really can't do anything if your logistics don't work. He started suffering with his health in 2008, so he stepped down as president. And then in 2011, he stepped down as chairman of the Cuban Communist Party in favor of his brother Raul. He would then die in 2016. Unfortunately, they never actually explained what he died of, but that's something very common in dictatorships. You know, the glorious leader. We don't want them to be weak. We don't want this. So, those are 6 examples of fascist and communist leaders. As you see, a lot of it is, if you look at the fascists, with the exception of Franco, it's actually done kind of in a diplomatic way. Like Mussolini convinced, through fear of course, but he convinced the king to make him president, well, prime minister. Hitler was the elected chancellor, and he declared the 2 offices related. Franco's the exception, because Franco was actually the military junta that took over Spain, they were never expecting someone like Franco to show up. He kind of he tried to play the moderation, and that's why he is, of all these folks except, I believe, Mao. No, I think he lived longer than Mao. He was in charge longer than Mao. He stayed in power the longest because he really wasn't that way, like he had no agenda except Spain. And if you look at the communist leaders, most of them take over through coups, through military takeovers, through revolutions, things like that. And that's how these are 6 of these states. So what's the difference and what are the similarities? Well, the differences, I'm just going to read you the textbook differences because, unfortunately, there isn't that many differences. But so, in fascism, everything's for the state. The state owns everything. You don't matter. Your family isn't, nothing matters. You adhere to the state. You do what the state tells you to do, and then the state succeeds. In communism, it's all for the people. The proletariat. The people who work the machines, that farm the food, they are the ones who take precedence over everyone else. Now, don't confuse that with individualism. That's not individualism. It's collectivism. So fascism isn't collective. It's you live for the state. Whereas communism is collective in the fact that everything is for the collective of people. Now, communism believes in collective control of industry. So, collective control of the military, collective control of the finance sector, collective control of the engineering, of everything. They believe the people who do the work should control what's being done. Whereas in fascism, it's the state controls everything. You do what I tell you, you do when I tell you. I don't care how it's done, it gets done. I want you to... a famous story is in Nazi Germany. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, he ordered every entertainment company in the country to start manufacturing radios. Volkswagen was another. Hitler ordered Volkswagen to mass produce cars to give off the idea the country was prosperous. So that's that difference. And then finally, communism is led by a committee. So a group of people come together and they make decisions for the collective. Whereas fascism is led by a single figure, a dictator. El Duces, Führers, Caudillos, things like that. Now, those are the textbook differences. But now we're going to look at the similarities, which are also the realities of both. Modern communist states, much like modern fascists, both emphasize nationalism. This is different than actual tenets of communism and international liberation, which means everyone's united together. So when Lenin and Trotsky sent Soviets into Finland, into Poland in the early days of the Soviet Union, that was international communism. That was real communism. They were trying to bring more people into it. But then, as time progressed, these communist states realized, oh, well, we really can't do that because not every state wants to be communist. So instead, they turned towards nationalism. We saw this with the parades of the Kims in North Korea, the parades of Stalin, the May Days. Castro had thousands of parades in Cuba. It was a very common thing because it was also a way of kind of puffing your feathers. To be like, oh, look what I got. We got more than they do. Because, the countries these countries are facing off with were like England and the United States and France that did not do big military parades. We never really showcased our arsenal. Whereas they're like, look at us, we got this. So that's a big similarity, as you see with Germany and Italy and Spain. They love their military parades. One of the reasons Franco brought the king back was strictly because of the popularity. A king, look at England, how popular the British monarch is. It's this idea of, oh my gosh, this is what I belong to. It's so beautiful, it's so strong, and it's this manipulation of something that really isn't that big a deal, but they make it into a big deal. Next similarity, single state leadership. Again, communism calls for a committee, but that's also why most communist dictators are usually referred to as chairman or chairwomen. Stalin was a chairman, Mao was a chairman. The Kims of North Korea, to this day, Kim Jong-un is the chairman of the Korean Communist Party. In fascist states, you have, Führer, Duce, Caudillos, because it's power, it's control, and the most ambitious takes that place. And finally, this is the biggest one, which, everyone is afraid of, especially these days, because we've become more... People debate America as the security state. I don't think we really are. I think we're just a cautious state. But the use of the security state. In Russia, you could have a communist party with the Cheka, the NKVD, or the KGB. In Germany, you had the SD department, or the Gestapo. Which the idea of the security state is a great fear in modern times, and in modern fascistic and communist states, like China, Hungary, Russia, they use their secret police to terrifying extent. You say one thing against someone, you're gone. It was as if you never existed. In North Korea, they actually have, I believe it's called root and stem. 3 generations of punishment. If you commit a crime, your children, your parents, and your grandparents can all go to prison and suffer because you made an infraction. So that's the thing, is a lot of people don't realize about communism. In a way, it always becomes a dictatorship. In a way, it always, during the Cold War, the Berlin Wall was called the Anti-Fascist Wall in the East German part of Berlin. That's because fascism and communism are, in quote, sworn rivals. It's not really. They kind of just take stuff from each other. Because the communist governments controlled the industry, just like the Nazi government or the fascist government in Italy or the Francoises. They controlled all industry. So it really became a semantic game. A phrase I often use, like I said before, fascism is just a more honest communism. The reality system is, as I just said, there's more similarities between fascism and communism that we see. Both are security states with single-party control. There's a difference between a socialist state and a communist state. A communist state, the Communist Party is in charge. There's no question of that. In a socialist state, the socialist government has a lot, but there are other parties. So, an example of that would be like Mugabe in Africa. There were other parties. It's just there were more socialists. Both the security states, in both forms of government, the most powerful people are the bureaucrats, the militarists, and the security apparatus. They're the best treated. They are the best paid. They're fed. They're clothed. They're given lavish apartments. We were talking about Lenin. The people's hero, he was living in a mansion outside Moscow. He lived inside the Kremlin. He tried to act like he wasn't trying to, but he was literally living inside the palace of an emperor. So, in both these governments, that happens a lot. That these groups are the ones treated well, and then the regular citizenry is abused and used, whether it be in factories, whether it be in war. They're just, in the eyes of both governments, they are used as just send them away. Let them deal with it. Both end in dictatorships, however you see it, in Italy, they did this thing. It was the Fascist Council. Mussolini would meet with like 30 different fascists, and they would discuss things. At the end of the day, that didn't matter. Hitler did the same thing in Germany as Franco did in Spain. Just because you say you're going to do it doesn't mean you're actually doing it. So these are the realities of these systems. And why does that always happen? Why do we always have a dictator? Why do we always have one man or woman in command? It's because as much as we, as people, look for the best in one another, at the end of the day, in all of us, regardless of race, gender, religion, or background, we are ambitious. Undeniably, we are ambitious. As the old saying goes, absolute power, absolute corrupts. And both communist and fascist states always end in corruption. You know, you have the bureaucrats, you have the oligarchs. Regardless, it will always happen. And that's anything. That's a neo-feudal state. That's anything. It will always happen. So now let's discuss fascism and communism in today's world, where we're living, the 21st century, modern world. So let's look at the United States. You know, we've been hearing this word fascist, anti-fascist, and all these things. I'm going to tell you all a fact right now. And I know people are going to say, oh, that's fake news. Oh, no, you're wrong. Fascism is not a threat in the United States. We often think fascism is a threat because politicians, like former President Trump, were populists. You can have populism without fascism, is the reality. A saying goes, you can have populism without fascism, but you cannot have fascism without populism. What that means is most of the country needs to support the idea in order for it to happen. And the majority of the country does not. So let's get this straight. There is no mainstream figure, including the former president, who is actually a fascist. However, we do have fringe figures who believe in fascism. People like Richard Spencer, who is someone who really shouldn't even have a voice, but we live in a country, everyone has the right to speak. But he is the worst we have, and he is, I literally, most of you probably are sitting here like, who is that right now? Because he's so influential. But unfortunately, we do have many serving members of our government who, I'm not going to say support communism, but support communist ideologies. They want complete state control of things. They want increase of the security state. They push propaganda. Again, I'm not going to name these people. I only named the one guy because I hate him and he's a terrible person. I'm not really someone that hates people, but he is a horrible human being. But in the United States, there is no real threat of communism or fascism. There is a threat of socialism. And that's from these individuals who are unfortunately serving in our government right now. And again, like I said before, and this is just, I'm not trying to push ideas or anything, I'm just saying, if we look at history and we look at the facts, they're going to be set regardless what happens because they're in power. That's what's so great about America is we have a democratic system that we can get rid of them if we really want to. But let's move on from North America. In Europe, most Eastern Bloc countries are actually very fascistic. This is mainly because they suffered under the boots of the Soviet Union. So in their fear after gaining independence, they turned towards the polar opposite of communism, which is fascism. So Hungary, some people think Poland's a little fascistic. I'm not going to comment because I really am not familiar. I'm just going off reports of what people say. Now this is the part where it's going to be a little bit more like hearsay. Romania, some people say, is a little fascistic. The Czech Republic, all the Slavic nations. Someone said Croatia was apparently, I don't know. But those are the countries which, in Europe today, you know, people sometimes say the conservatives in England are fascistic. If Boris Johnson's a fascist, fascists are in trouble because that guy is not a fascist at all. I don't know. But, again, it's, you know, in Asia, we have, of course, China, Vietnam, and North Korea are declared communist states. Fascism is really not a thing in Asia, I've noticed. Saddam Hussein was kind of a fascist in the religious sense, but there's really no modern fascist states in Asia, mainly just communist states. that's mainly due to the the Soviet influence, being so close to each other. When the Soviet Union fell, clearly China, Vietnam, North Korea did not fall. In Africa, though many African states identify as socialists, they are democratic. I mentioned Mugabe before. Some, however, are ruled by warlords. And some people would say that's fascist, but they really don't show the ideologies. They're more of neo-feudalists, like feudalistic. They really aren't like pushing nationalism or anything. They're kind of just forcing people to be their servants, kind of thing, which is horrible. But that's kind of the reality of it. It's we really don't have any fascism in Africa. South America, Venezuela is a socialist state, which some people say communist, but it's socialist. Chavez and Maduro. I don't know why they're still in power. Well, Hugo's not, but Maduro is. But yeah, unfortunate. Argentine was for a period fascist under Leopoldo Galtieri, and in Chile, Augusto Pinochet was called a fascist, and he was actually an admirer of Francisco Franco. Again, he was another dictator-like person. And again, all these governments, regardless, communist, fascist, socialist, right, left, whatever say you, always ends in a dictator. So, alright. Now that we're coming to the end, guys, this is where I'm going to go into one of my famous monologues. When people hear these words, we see the nightmares of the Holocaust, the suffering of the Holodomor of the Ukraine by Stalin, the horrors of Khmer Rouge, and the white and red terrors in Spain. And those terrors culminated in 473,000 Spanish civilians and soldiers murdered without just cause. But we're getting to this point in modern society where these words are losing their meaning. We have the Antifa, who, they're really not Antifa. Again, me and Andrew are little L libertarians. According to these people, these Antifa people, me and Andrew would be called fascists, but we're not. We're very far from it. We're very much about people living the lives they want to live, being happy, pursuit of happiness, classical liberalism, things like that. Locke, Voltaire, not Engels and Marx or Nietzsche. We don't believe in that. We believe in like free expression, freedom, being happy. But there's these two sides forming. There's these two groups. There's one group that says fascist is evil and communist is the greatest good, and then the other side that says both are wrong. And those sides aren't Democrat versus Republican. I know I'm probably about to get criticized by the right by saying that, but the famous political phrase is don't let a tragedy go to waste. Just because you have Democrats who are on the same side with socialists doesn't mean they believe it. It's just they see them as a means to an end. Which is slimy. It's a slimy thing to do, but it's really not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's a extremist versus rational issue. So I think, we need to have these discussions. We need to actually look at the past and see what happened then. Because if we don't, these problems will keep happening. It's something, history is great with this. History is like the greatest rhyme ever told. Because everything just keeps happening. And we need to try to be that generation. We need to try to be that people to stop that from happening. Thanks for watching. Please, this was not an ideology video or an opinion. This was a rundown on both ideologies. As pure as communism sounds, it's very often nefarious, and fascism is just the ideology of evil. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.